Daemon Targaryen is known as the Rogue Prince for countless reasons. From almost starting a civil war with Corlys Velaryon during the succession crisis of 101 AC, where a great council was needed to decide between Viserys Targaryen and Laenor Velaryon, his brutal management and reformation of the City Watch, where he dished out his brutal form of justice, his love for brothels, and stealing a dragon egg to give his pregnant paramour, which was the source of much conflict between himself and his brother. Definitely the behaviours of someone known as the Rogue Prince. But if you ask me, there is one huge reason Daemon gained his reputation as a Rogue Prince, and that was the war he fought without the leave of the crown and the king, resulting in Daemon crowning himself the king of the Narrow Sea for a short while before he gave up his petty kingdom, bent his knee to his brother and gave him his crown, coming back into the royal fold. But why was Daemon's warring so controversial and put the Iron Throne and King Viserys in such an awkward position? It's not clear in lore who approached who about entering into the war in the Stepstones, but what we do know is that in 106 AC, shortly after the marriage of King Viserys to Alicent Hightower, Corlys Velaryon and Prince Daemon would meet on Driftmark for what effectively became their first war council. It was not just Daemon who was acting in a roguish manner here, but also Corlys and House Velaryon, whom had already caused a stir by missing the wedding of the king to Alicent. Whoever approached who, it is clear that Daemon was keen to leave his exile in the Vale, quoted as telling Corlys, when they first met, that his Valyrian steel sword, Dark Sister, was made for much nobler tasks than simply butchering sheep, that she had a thirst for blood. Whilst on the surface it may have looked like they were planning rebellion, given the history of both his wife and his son's claim to the Iron Throne, but it was not the Iron Throne that Corlys and Daemon would set their eyes upon. The Stepstones is a chain of rocky islands between Dorne and the disputed lands of Essos that once formed the land bridge between the two continents before the coming of the first men to Westeros. The Children of the Forest, in an attempt to halt the coming of the human invaders, used powerful magic to break the land, leaving only the Stepstones behind. The Stepstones, ever since, had long been the haunt of outlaws, exiles, wreckers and pirates, who made the island chain their home. The islands themselves were of little worth, but placed as they were between Dorne and the Free Cities, they controlled the sea lanes to and from the Narrow Sea, and merchant ships passing through those waters were often preyed on by their inhabitants. Still, for centuries, such issues had remained no more than a nuisance for the traders. 10 years earlier, however, the Free Cities of Lys, Myr and Tyrosh had put aside their ancient enmities to make a common cause in a war against Volantis. After defeating the Volantines in the Battle of the Borderland, the three victorious cities had entered into an eternal alliance and formed a strong new power, the Triarchy, better known in Westeros as the Kingdom of the Three Daughters. Once Volantis sued for peace and withdrew from the disputed lands, the Three Daughters turned their gaze westward, swooping over the Stepstones with their combined armies and fleets, under the command of Emirish Prince Admiral Kragas Drahar, who earned the nickname Kragas Crabfeeder when he staked out hundreds of captive pirates on the West Sands to drown beneath the rising tides. The conquest and annexation of the Stepstones by the Kingdom of the Three Daughters at first met with only approval by the Lords of Westeros. Order replaced chaos, and the Three Daughters demanded a toll of any ships passing through the waters. That seemed a small price to pay to be rid of the pirates. The avarice of Kragas Crabfeeder and his partners in conquest soon turned the feeling against them, however. The toll was raised again and yet again, soon becoming so ruinous that the merchants who had once paid gladly now sought to slip past the galleys of the Triarchy, as they had once done the pirates. Drahar and the Lyseni and Tyroshi co-admirals seemed to be vying with each other to see who was the greediest. The Lyseni became especially loath, for they claimed more than coin from passing ships, taking off women, girls, comely young boys, to serve in their pleasure gardens and pillow houses. All the lords of Westeros, none suffered so much from these practices as Corlys Velaryon, the Lord of the Tides, whose trade fleets had made him wealthy and powerful as any man in the Seven Kingdoms, even more so than the Lannisters of Casterly Rock. For some time, the Sea Snake was determined to put an end to the Triarchy's rule over the Stepstones, and in Daemon Targaryen he found a willing partner, eager for gold and glory that victory in war would bring him. Given this, it would suggest that the war in the Stepstones was the idea of the Sea Snake, but that cannot be confirmed. Both Corlys and Daemon shunning the king's wedding, they laid their plans in high tide on the Isle of Driftmark. Lord Velaryon would obviously command the war fleet, while Prince Daemon the army. They'd be greatly outnumbered by the forces of the Three Daughters, with the only ground forces at their command that of the men of House Velaryon, and the meagre number of sellswords they could muster. But the prince would also bring to battle the fires of his dragon, Caraxes the Bloodworm, and Caraxes alone would make up for their lack of number tenfold. Now, officially in the lore or the books, we don't really know the details of the war in the Stepstones that much. What we do know for sure is that the fighting began in earnest in 106 AC after the meeting on Driftmark. Prince Daemon had little difficulty assembling an army of landless adventurers and second sons, and won many victories during the first 2 years of the conflict. The issue the prince and the sea snake faced was taking the largest of the Stepstones after the forces of the Craft Feeder turned to guerrilla warfare in an attempt to mitigate the impact Daemon and Caraxes were having on the battles. Therefore, employing the same guerrilla tactics the Dornish had used against Aegon the Conqueror during the conquest, they were able to hold back the Targaryen invaders. In 108 AC, when at last Daemon came face to face with Craghas Crabfeeder, he slew him single-handed and cut off his head with Darksister, and the Stepstones were finally pacified. King Viserys, doubtly pleased to be rid of his troublesome brother, supported his efforts with regular infusions of gold, and by 109 AC, Daemon Targaryen and his army of sellswords and cutthroats controlled all but 2 of the islands, and the Sea Snake's fleets had taken firm control of the waters between them. During this brief moment of victory, Prince Daemon declared himself King of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea, and Lord Corlys placed a crown upon his head, but their kingdom was far from secure. The next year, the Kingdom of the Three Daughters dispatched a fresh invasion force under the command of a devious Tyroshi captain named Rankalia Rydun, surely one of the most curious and flamboyant rogues in the annals of history, and Dorne joined the war in alliance with the Triarchy. Fighting resumed. But by 111 AC, bored with ruling his meagre kingdom, Daemon returned to the capital during the tourney that gave the Blacks and the Greens their name. He reconciled with Viserys by offering his Stepstone's crown, and Viserys welcomed his brother to return, and Daemon was given a seat on the small council. It's unclear how the Stepstones were held after Daemon left, but it's fair to speculate a sizable garrison and the warships they left behind were able to hold out against the likes of Rankalia Rydun for some time. So why do I think this war is what truly made Daemon the Rogue Prince? His actions before this were, while wild and against the grain of a man in his position, starting a war without the leave of the crown is a huge deal. The Triarchy was a massive power during this era and cannot simply be pushed aside. They could have posed a real threat to Targaryen Westeros in an all-out war, and that is what Daemon and Corlys risked by getting involved in the Stepstones. But lucky for the Iron Throne, it's clear that the Triarchy understood that this was not a proxy war by the crown, but by 2 rogue lords. Also consider that I think it's fair, well, given the dragons, the Triarchy, whose alliance was tenuous at best, also would have wanted to avoid the war with Westeros and their dragons as well. But it's not just a war that speaks to how rogue Daemon's actions were, but the fact he crowned himself a king, in effect saying to the world that he was equal to his brother. In a way, it's surprising Viserys would forgive Daemon, but no matter if you think it was the war in the Stepstones, his time as the commander of the Goldcloaks, his marriage to Laena Velaryon, or his pursuit of Rhaenyra that made Daemon worthy of the title of the Rogue Prince, what we can say for sure is this: he loved and respected his brother. I mean, he almost started a civil war during the succession crisis of 101 for him. And I think much of his acting out and behaviour was very much seeking Viserys' approval. But at the same time, Daemon was very much Team Daemon, and also looked to secure his own power and influence.